Salam sejahtera, anda sedang menonton agenda AWANI bersama saya, Naila Huda. Dan baru-baru ini, Pejabat Hak Asasi Manusia Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu PBB atau Human Rights Office di United Nations mengeluarkan satu laporan yang bertahun sudah pun dinanti-nantikan, iaitu laporan berhubung dengan bagaimana kerajaan China melaksanakan dasarnya di wilayah Xinjiang yang menyatakan secara jelasnya bahawa dasar kerajaan China di Xinjiang merupakan pelanggaran hak asasi manusia dan khususnya melihat kepada amalan penahanan kumpulan etnik Uighur dan juga kumpulan-kumpulan minoriti umat Islam yang lain di wilayah Xinjiang yang dikatakan melanggar hak asasi manusia. Dan sebelum ini kalau kita lihat sudah ada pelbagai laporan yang sudah pun menjelaskan dan mendedahkan pelbagai amalan dan praktis di wilayah Xinjiang ini yang sudah pun dilihat melanggar hak asasi manusia dan juga undang-undang antarabangsa. Tetapi apa yang berbeza dalam laporan kali ini adalah pendedahan ini dilakukan pada tahap yang lebih tinggi iaitu pada peringkat PBB dan ini juga bermaksud negara tidak boleh lagi mengambil remeh mengenai dengan perkara dan isu yang serius ini. Dan untuk jam ini kita nak bincangkan apa impak laporan yang dikeluarkan oleh PBB, apa yang diperlukan oleh kumpulan etnik Uighur dan juga kumpulan etnik minoriti yang lain di Xinjiang ini dan apa yang boleh dilakukan oleh negara seperti Malaysia. Dan sudah bersedia di studio untuk membincangkan lebih lanjut mengenai dengan laporan ini dan apa yang diperlukan oleh masyarakat Uighur. Sudah bersedia bersama saya Nur Muhammad Majid, pengerusi Persatuan Hak Asasi Turkistan Timur di Turki. Dan izinkan saya teruskan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Thank you so much Nur Muhammad for joining me today in the studio.
Thank you for having me today.
First off, I want to start with the recent report that's being released by the UN Human Rights Office. What do you make of this report?
Firstly, the East Turkestan community living in abroad or in East Turkestan warmly welcomes the issuance of this report made on the 31st of August 2022 is founding the evidence that how Chinese government is exercising the excessive level of discrimination policies on the Uighur people, which resembles crimes against humanity. This matter has been on the agenda of many of the international NGO and other states for many years, but this report particularly is giving us solid evidence to prove that claim is genuine. And secondly this report details the deep ongoing concerns of the humanity, particularly on the Uighur nation that has been committed by the Chinese government, which is a global superpower, in relation to the violation of the human rights, political rights, social rights, and other rights which is prescribed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We also welcome that the statements made by the countries, including the United States, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, which clearly stating they are concerned about this report and about the human rights situation in East Turkestan. And we also see that this is going to be a crucial baselines for many countries or many of the institutions to act on these growing concerns of the Uyghur genocide matter, to take some actions to defend, to promote or protect the Uyghur rights globally.
There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the report and some even believe that it's been delayed now and it took a lot of time for it to be released and there's been a lot of pressure on the Michelle Bachelet's office to release the report. What do you make of the controversies and as well as the allegations that there have been also pressures from the Beijing government?
Yes, the report just came 10 days before the resignations or the departure of the Human Rights Commissioner. However, this report is valid. Secondly, is issued by the United Nations, not by one particular commissioner, and this is based on the many of the recommendations, academic findings, or the other researchers, or with the collective effort of the many countries. And yes, there has been some pressure by the Chinese government because China is member of the Security Council at the United Nations, but we have seen with the issuance of this report that the global community is no longer to be threatened by the Chinese intimidations because the fact has been given, the people are suffering great amount of persecution policies under the Chinese regime, which amounts to genocide, which is proven by the UK tribunal in 2021. But the UN states clearly without mentioning the term called genocide, however, referring to all the other elements which resembles to genocide, the definitions, giving the foundations of torture, the sterilization of women, abduction of children, and destructions of the normal social order, on all other discriminatory policies implemented by the Chinese government, specifically in the last 5 years' time, in that area of the detention camps. The millions or more than 1 million Uyghurs according to the United Nations, but however this number can be more than 5 million according to independent findings. Regardless, over 1 million populations of particular ethnic group is being targeted specifically for the purpose of achieving one state's aim of economic stability or political stability, this is not acceptable. That's why we see that although there has been a resistance from the Chinese government, or they made the protest letter to the other entities in globally, however, the fact is undeniable. The fact is there, and the fact is based on the findings of the real circumstances happening in East Turkestan today.
There have already been many reports over the past few years exposing what's been going on in Xinjiang in the detention centers. But what is different about the report released by the UN Human Rights Office? Do you think this report captures and portrays accurately the lived reality in Xinjiang?
That's absolutely correct. In the past, many of the NGOs, state governments, academics have produced excellence of reports or other research projects detailing the level of atrocities committed by the Chinese government. Namely, the Dr. Adrian's recent report, which is Xinjiang Police File, clearly demonstrated how the Chinese government instrumentally installed a system of destructions against the Uyghur nations. Also, the UK tribunal finds in last year, plus that the United States 2 bills, which is Uyghur Human Rights Bill in 2020, plus that the another bill which is documented last year in relation to the slavery or forced labor prevention bill in the United States. All these documents have mentioned the cruciality of this human rights concern in East Turkestan. But UN report is giving the universality of this matter, relevance to all areas of the humans or the countries or institutions to take actions, to put their effort to do more investigation, or to help to save of the survival of the Uyghur nation. That's why we believe that this will be laying a foundation to the further investigations. We believe even to the stage of ICJ, International Criminal Court of Justice, because all the matter detailed in this report is actually is elements of crime sponsored by a state which is claimed to be a superpower of today's world. That's why we believe that the countries or the other relevant stakeholders has to play a role in accordance to the UN findings. And this is based on the fact. It's not a fabrication of stories as China claimed. This is based on the fact and the cost of millions of Uyghur lives.
Now that these atrocities have been exposed and published not by just some independent organizations or some journalists, but these are now published by the UN Human Rights Office, what do you think countries should do now, and what do you make of countries that just sit by and don't do anything and just sit and watch?
Firstly, the United Nations has 193 member countries. All UN member countries should first respect, accept, and recognize this report. Then, according to the descriptive context of this report, the countries should act in their own capacities, believing that this matter is not a simply one-time or conflicted matter, rather is relevant to the global order of this contemporary politics. Because China is aiming to achieve a global dominance by economic influence, political influence, or by diplomatic missions with the other countries. Whereas China is implementing such hardline policies in East Turkestan, this has to be questioned, or China has to be taken into accountability by the international communities. That's why what we believe, the countries who respects or member to UN start actioning on this agenda, put pressure on Chinese government, especially on the release of those detained Uyghurs without any judicial process. And secondly is granting freedom to the Uyghur people in terms of their normal life, in terms of their belief, in terms of speech, in terms of their travel, in terms of access to their family members, both in East Turkestan and outside of East Turkestan. These are the basic human rights. And all countries should not be ashamed of, should not be ashamed of talking to Chinese government or the Chinese counterparts, mentioning the gravity of this matter, relevance of this matter, and the universality of this matter.
Now, going back to the role that other countries should be playing, we cannot put aside the interest of geopolitics and economic interests as well. It seems like that's the go-to excuse for a lot of the countries that are not making a strong statement or making a strong stance towards what's happening in Xinjiang, because they're prioritizing their economic interests, seeing that China is a major player in the global economy. So what do you make of this sort of, I guess we can call this an excuse, right, by certain countries that they're prioritizing economic interests, or that has to be a priority in regards to them discussing or making a stance regarding the Xinjiang issue? How should countries then balance between their economic relationship with China, but at the same time making a stance about this crisis?
Indeed, many countries, including the United States, Australia, and Malaysia, have a strong economic ties with China. And China is playing roles in some sense to the global economy. We don't deny that. However, the countries like democratic countries, especially the EU countries, America, Canada, Japan, Malaysia, or Australia, New Zealand, all these countries who previously wrote a petition letter to the United Nations with the concern of the Uyghur human rights issues, should follow the guidelines of this UN report now to put pressure on the Chinese government without compromising their economic ties. Because these countries will have their own constitutional rights, will have their own respect in relation to the human rights of the particular groups living on the face of the earth. This matter is not, we're not claiming about the political collision with the Chinese government, rather requesting or demanding the international community put an alarming eye on the human rights concern, which can be rectified by the collective effort of the international community. Hence, the countries should not be giving an excuse to reject the promotion or protections of the human rights of the Uyghur people of East Turkestan just for purely based off the economic interest with the Chinese government. They need to talk to the Chinese government openly, decently, and bravely, because this is a fact. Nothing wrong to say that why the 5 million people are detained and they are not able to access. Why this report of your legal documentation leaked from your government agencies clearly state that you are imposing sterilization of women, sexual harassment on women, abduction of the children, destruction of the environment, not only from the ethnic, Muslim or the religious perspective, all other areas, such as social areas, the demographic areas, health areas, mental status, the other illnesses or trauma that people are going through is relevant to the concern of the other countries, because we believe that in those respective countries they implemented sophisticated ways to protect the interests of those groups.
So going back to what you said about how Uyghurs really just want to lead normal lives, going back to the UN report, one of the main recommendations made by the UN Human Rights Office was to ensure the release of the Uyghur community and other minorities as well in these detention centers, for them to be freed immediately. What do you make of this recommendation, or should there be other priorities right now? What should be done immediately for the welfare of Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang?
The top priority at now is the release of those millions of Uyghurs who are arbitrarily detained in the concentration camps, because this is relevant to the overall welfare of the whole community, both in East Turkestan and outside. This is relevant to the normal continuation of the civil development of that region, civil development of that human groups living in that corner of the world. Because with the, if Chinese government claims that we have about 11 million Uyghurs living and over 1 million is detained, which is significant proportion of that population is now segmented. Among them, there are highly educated people, doctors, businessmen, or the people who previously made huge commitment or contribution to the Chinese economy or Chinese development. And those people has to return their homes to be able to have access to their normal lives, to be continue their professional life, to be able to continue their professional life, and to be able to resemble the real nature of the human society. We don't want to live in a cage by open prisons. Chinese government should at least respect the rights of these people to exercise their normal life. The families are torn apart. Children, women are living in a desperate situation at the moment. That's why the countries or international community put pressure on the Chinese government as a top priority to the release of those detained arbitrarily by the Chinese government in the concentration camps. There are many of the other requests or demands. Of course, we want our religious freedom to be granted as per state in the Chinese constitutional laws, as per state in the regional autonomous laws, as per state in the other international norms or laws that China has signed.
What will happen to the Uyghur people if no action is being taken now?
Well, we are positioned in an edge, crucial edge, that either we're going to fall or we will have an opportunity to be dragged down to the main areas. This is up to the international community, because Chinese government has not left any single room for the existence of the Uyghur nation in a decent way. If the situation continues like this, we are afraid to say that Uyghur will become part of the history, and then such significant contributing nations called East Turkestan to the Muslim or the non-Muslim or the whole general public of the universe is going to vanish in secrecy. That's why it is a matter of all humans, all countries and all stakeholders, including the Chinese and the Chinese living in overseas.
So again, going back to the report, this has been exposed and published on the highest level possible. It's the UN Human Rights Office. But if, again, going back to the possibility that no action is being taken, what then? What other avenues are there? I mean, there's also the tribunal that's ongoing in London right now, but what other avenues would the Uyghur community have to voice out the atrocities that's happening in Xinjiang?
Despite the fact that the Chinese government is putting the internal East Turkestan Uyghur community into locked status, the Uyghur diaspora community living in different parts of the world have taken immense amount of work to advocate for the rights of the Uyghurs. They have taken numerous of steps, such as public diplomacy, speaking out, protest rally, testimonies, and seminars and research projects and media interviews. All areas, there are a great amount of effort made by the Uyghur communities living in abroad. But this is also relevant to the countries where the Uyghur communities are currently presiding in. So these countries will not be stopped will not be just keep their silence, whereas the Uighur communities or the East Turkestan communities in those respective countries keep fighting for the struggle of the Uyghurs. And we believe that the next step could be taken by all means. The Chinese genocide policies, Chinese atrocities, and the Chinese crimes against humanity are well proven by now. And next step is to go to the International Court of Justice to identify whether the Chinese government is particularly assaulting or genociding this group of people, whether the Chinese authorities are responsible or accountable for its crimes against humanity. And we need a brave nation, a real decent nation, to step up first to file these evidences at the ICJ.
Now, lastly, going back to the future of the Uyghur community, I want to talk a little bit about the East Turkestan independence movement. Is that the case for your organization, for your association? Is that what you're trying to advocate? And is that the only necessary way for the Uyghur community to survive in the future?
Excellent question. People ask me many times, what's your goal? All right? We start this answering to this question by asking another question. What China gave to us in the last 72 years' time? Okay? This is a simple question. Anyone can answer. So they have taken our freedom. They have taken our resources. They have taken our rights. They have killed our people. They have not left any space for us to sustain in our homeland. Despite they named the region as autonomous region, but this place has become a dystopian region. That's why the conclusion is that if China fully respects, recognizes, and give us that level of freedom, that we can exercise all our rights, access our resources, make our region profitable for the whole Uyghur community, lift up the overall status of the Uyghur people. This is another option. But Chinese government will not negotiate on this, because China has put this region purposely into this dystopian state because they want to achieve their permanent stability by suppressing the whole nation of East Turkestan. Hence, last options or the only solution is going to be let Uyghur nation, let East Turkestan to be a free country that can purely beneficial to the existence or sustenance of the Uyghur people. Uyghur people are peace-loving people. Before Chinese came, we were independent. We were the contributor to the international community on many ways. Islamic research, not from the Islamic perspective, but from the human civilization perspective, we made great amount of achievements far before Chinese came into our region. Yes, indeed, we are capable of reinstalling the similar system or similar level of dedication to our country if the options of sovereignty is given to us, or we are able to gain that status.
Now, the road to achieving this goal surely is a long way to go, but holding on to that hope, how far ahead do you see this goal being achieved? In your lifetime, perhaps, or not?
It's quite long.
Yeah.
Yes, the journey is too long.
I mean, I think even discussing this idea is even controversial.
This journey has already been started because the countries, conventionally, they look into the matter as from the one angle, either from the ethnic problem with the Chinese government or the human rights concern with their policies, etc. But today's world is seeing the matter, or this reality, from the multi-dimensional angles to assess whether the level of atrocities committed by the Chinese government in the last 72 years in this particular region is working or not working. What's the impact? What's the overall damage that has been caused? The destruction of East Turkestan integrity, this kind of genocide policies that China implemented today is giving two lessons. One is giving the international community that China does not respect the rights of the humans, because we are human first. Secondly, China does not care about the damage in order to achieve their goals. That's why the countries should be very cautious when dealing with China, especially the countries who signed the BRI project agreements, especially the countries who are neighboring with China, who are having kind of controversial issues such as South China Sea, illegal fishing, or other matters, or the military threat posed to Taiwan, or democratic suppressed in Hong Kong, or the voice of Tibet, East Turkestan. All these issues overall tells one thing, that the consideration for the independence or sovereignty of East Turkestan should be considered, should be analyzed, should be investigated, and should be put into place.
Plenty more I'd like to discuss with you, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Nur Muhammad, for joining me today. Itu tadi Nur Muhammad Majid, Pengerusi Persatuan Hak Asasi Turkistan Timur di Turki, berkongsi sedikit sebanyak mengenai dengan laporan yang baru saja dikeluarkan oleh Pejabat Hak Asasi Manusia PBB dan juga mengenai dengan masa depan komuniti Uighur dan apa yang mereka perlukan, antaranya mengenai dengan kemerdekaan yang dikatakan satu konsep kemerdekaan bagi Turkistan Timur. Dan itu saja masa yang kita ada untuk agenda Awani jam ini. Bersama saya, Naila Huda. Jumpa lagi. Salam hormat.